voting. Why do you think that we have to like jump in a car, drive somewhere, stand in line, you know, click a ballot, punch a hole in it, fill it out, whatever, drive home? I mean, we bank online. People buy jets online. I mean, do, do you think that we should be able to vote online?
Yeah.
And why do you think that's not already happened? Is it because it's government run and government tends to not kind of, you may disagree with me on this, but you look at a company like Amazon or Google, I mean, they just take strides, and I mean, they are tech companies, I understand that, but they take something that's a pain in the butt, like getting a taxi, and next thing you know, you can just do it on an app. And government tends to be a little more clunky and a little farther behind in those types of things. They don't have sort of the monetary incentive that the privately owned or publicly traded startup has. Is that why we can't vote online, or why? It shouldn't be that hard, right?
It shouldn't be, but voter suppression. I mean, if we made it easy, everybody would do it. And the more people that do it, the less politicians have power to empower the Amazons and the financial capitalist monopolies. So it's all a part of the bigger system. Like if they said all of us could go out and vote, if they made it easy for everybody to vote and access to voting was equitable, a lot of the things that we see happening right now wouldn't be happening. I mean, even let's just say we didn't change politicians. I think one of the things that people don't realize is they're like, oh, the electoral college, and no matter who you put in office, they're going to be crooked. And I'm like, no, they're crooked because they have nobody to answer to.
Right.
They were elected with less than 10% of the voting population. So who's going to check them? But if you have 80, 90% of the voting population go out and vote, and they know that, and their political strategists are telling them, look, all these areas came out to the polls, and Amazon's coming to them and saying, look, I need you to deliver on this. And if you don't deliver on this, I can't fund this, this, and this for you. And the people are saying something, and they're saying, well, we're going to vote you out. You put pressure on them. Right now, politicians, when voter turnout is low, when voter registration is low, there's no pressure for politicians to perform. They have nobody to answer to.
Yeah.
Besides Amazon.
Yeah.
I bet you they never miss. I bet you Jeff Bezos never misses an election.
Yeah.
Or he never misses a financial disclosure of an election that he cares about.
Yeah. Yeah. You're probably right about that. What is the percentage of the population in Tennessee that actually vote? Do you know offhand? Like as far as what the voter turnout is?
We'll see like 45. We were ranked 45th in voter turnout based off the 2018 election. Right now, we have less than 40% of the population that comes out and vote. When you look at the black population, when you look at the brown population, it's even less. So typically, voting is the rules, the laws that are being made, as bad as I hate to admit this, actually reflect the people that are voting. Older white men are voting. And so the laws are created to benefit older white men. And what happens is, like in 1965, after the Montgomery bus boycott, where they were organizing money, right, and people, and you saw the Voting Rights Act of 1965 come out, black people were voting in high numbers. That was right around the time when home ownership was starting to go up and things like that. And then boom, the movement got killed, because obviously white supremacy, and less and less people stopped voting for several reasons. Voter suppression was one of them. What we failed to do in 2013, Shelby versus Holder gutted a pivotal piece of the Voting Rights Act, which made it basically legal for states, typically states that were southern states, to come in and change voting laws. Prior to that, they had to go through the federal government, Congress and Senate, to be able to change voting laws. Once that happened, a lot of states, southern states, started implementing different rules that made it more difficult to vote. ID laws, changing the polling times and polling locations. They started implementing felony voter rights restoration laws that prevented felons from voting. Tennessee is ranked the third from the bottom hardest state to vote in.
Third from the bottom.
Yeah, and you guys are business owners. Did you know that Tennessee has the most expensive amount that it costs to start an LLC in the country?
No,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Most places it's only like $80. It's like total $350
like-
here.
Yeah, it's okay. I didn't know that. And so when I was in New York State, I'd always have the attorneys create the LLC, and it was usually like $2,000 or something with attorney's fees and everything. I feel like I didn't know in other states it was. I thought Tennessee was cheap at $350.
Nope.
I will say in Tennessee, it's at least pretty easy to do yourself. Way easier than in New York State.
I'm pretty sure Tennessee has some of the strictest voting laws in the country.
Interesting.
We're the one state that requires felons who've served their time and gotten out to pay fines, fees, and child support. And on top of that, in Tennessee, if you let's say you go to prison for a felony and you're on child support, your child support continues to accrue while you're in prison. We're one of the only states that does that. I think it's like only 2 other states.
Wow. So now, as a woman, do you think, I mean, in some ways that I guess is, if it's a male that's a felon, it's bad for him, but in some ways it's good for the mom, right? If that's accruing. So as a woman, do you still think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing. As a single, not just a woman, but a single mom, I think it's a bad thing, particularly because what ends up happening is the state gets to assess their fees, and who do you think gonna get their money first?
Right. Of course.
They're gonna take their money first. And so while it may seem like, okay, and then if you think about it, if someone goes to prison for a felony and they're that behind on their child support, how much do you think they're going to be able to pay you?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? You come out better, because that's the other thing. If you're over so much on child support, not only do your voting rights get taken, they can take your driver's license, that can prevent you from getting a passport, that can prevent you from doing several things that could be a ticket to a job, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, it is not like P. Diddy's behind on child support.
Yeah, that's right. When it comes to like the different areas of how people are affected based on their race in this country, one of the areas that this book, have you read The New Jim Crow? Heard of it at least? They kind of dig into, well, I mean, a lot of different things, but they're looking at the laws and certainly, our criminal justice system a little bit. But when you look at some of the laws that were made in the 80s, 70s and 80s around particularly drug laws, you had powder cocaine that was more popular with white people. You had crack cocaine that was more popular with black people. And the laws for crack cocaine violation was 50. This sounds surely it wasn't 50. I want to say 50. It was an exorbitant amount, like so much worse if you got caught with crack cocaine than powder cocaine. Crack cocaine is not necessarily worse for you than powder cocaine. It was just based on, and this is at least the argument in the book, it was based on certain types of cocaine was more popular in certain types of circles, and the laws sort of took that into consideration in order to, I guess, imprison a larger percentage of a certain type of population, black and brown people. And then, one of the interesting things that talk about in that book is, all right, so, well, there's so much to dig into there. But then even you look at like where certain communities that these drug laws are being enforced in, and then certain communities where they're not being enforced in. And you can look at marijuana, you can look at cocaine, you can look at other types of drugs, that there is not necessarily a higher amount of use in the black and brown community. It's just that's where the police is focusing their attention more. And then you put people into prison or parole, and now you have a check on your record, which hurts when you're trying to get a job. It hurts when you're trying to get housing, which means you don't have as much opportunity, which means you don't have as much maybe hope for the future, which means you might get into trouble quicker again. I mean, it's just this cycle that just sort of perpetuates, which I think that book was written in 2010. I mean, there's certainly been some improvements there. I think it was... I want to say it was Obama that kind of got rid of the greater penalty, or at least to some degree, greater penalties for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. So, I mean, there's been some improvement there. But that level of what the laws are and where they are enforced is an interesting discussion that I think if we look at something like police brutality, obviously there's bad cops, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. But when you look at that. But then there's also a degree where sometimes cops might be getting, say, the blame that is maybe also due at the people that are making these laws and creating the policy. I mean, there's lots of blame that needs to be placed there too, which I don't feel like that level gets very much attention. It's usually more kind of boots on the ground.